I'm continuing my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I'm reading in a chronological order of events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a little bit as I move along. Right now, last video, I started in chapter 17 of the first book of Samuel. I will now continue this. This is the story of Goliath, David and Goliath. Now, we looked up tried to get an idea of how big this guy was, how big Goliath was, and as I mentioned, he is 6 cubits in a span, come out to approximately just under 10 feet in modern measurements. He would have been like 9'9", 9'10", something like that. But then the weight of his armor is given as 5,000 shekels, and the weight of his spear is 600 shekels. And this converts to a shekel is 15 grams. And I didn't personally know the conversion of grams to pounds, so I looked it up and I got some comparisons for you. So, just to compare real quick before we finish this chapter, 5,000 shekels is how much his armor weighed. 5,000 shekels would, in modern measurements, be approximately 165 pounds. So, for comparison, a medieval knight, their suit of full plate mail armor, all decked out, would have been about 55 pounds. And would have been considered extremely heavy for continuous use in combat. That would be very heavy armor. So he was wearing armor that weighed 3 times as much as a medieval knight. And that doesn't count the arm guards he had and the leg guards he had, or the shields that he wore a target on his back. That's a shield strapped onto your back. None of that was included in the weight. Now it also said his spear weighed 600 pounds. The head of his spear weighed 600 shekels, not 600 pounds. 600 shekels in modern measurements is about 13 pounds. Doesn't sound like a lot. But for comparison, the Spartans of ancient Greece, their spears at their heaviest were only 5 pounds. They averaged probably between 3 and 4 pounds. And they would have been a little bit bigger than most spears were at the time of David and Goliath. David and Goliath would have been, 500-600 years before the Spartans. So he's wielding a spear that's 5 to 6 times bigger than any other spear being used at the time, and he's wearing armor that is at least twice as heavy as anything being worn at the time. So, very interesting. That gives you an indication of just how big and how strong Goliath was. So now let us pick up the story. David heard the challenge, made a commotion in the camp, trying to tell people that somebody needed to kill the person. And Saul got wind of it, and he has sent for David. We pick this up in verse 32. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God." David said, moreover, "The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." So, I like the comparison. You are a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. Goliath was not a young man. He was probably in his 40s, maybe even in his 50s. He was not a young man. And so David, probably a teenager, he's called a youth, so he's probably not yet 20. And he's probably I'd say 17 or 18, around there. And remember his description in the previous chapter. Beautiful countenance, goodly to look upon. He was not a large man. He was a fair-looking young boy. And Saul's saying, you can't go fight him. And David says, look, I fought a bear, I fought a lion, because I had to, and God blessed me, and he will help me against this Philistine. And I think Saul recognized the faith. Because again, Saul puts his faith in the army, but he sees that David truly puts his faith in God, and he says, okay. Anyways, let us continue verse 38. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them. And David put them off, and he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. When it says that he had not proved them yet, see, armor back then is kind of like wearing shoes for the first time, like wearing skates for the first time. You got to break them in before you do any serious stuff with them. So he says, I have not proved them, meaning I haven't worn these before. They don't fit right. I'm not sure how to move in them yet. I'd have to practice with them before I could actually go into battle with them. So he's not just saying, oh, no, I don't need all this armor because God's with me. He's saying, this isn't going to do me any good. It's going to hinder me because I have not yet worked with this armor, so I don't know how this armor works yet. I've got to break it in, got to make it fit me before I can actually use it, and I don't have time. So instead, he took the sling and a staff. But it wasn't because he just he wanted to prove that God was. He did it because it would have been a hindrance to him if he had tried to wear it. Verse 41. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And I like that. A couple of things Goliath cursed David by his gods. And they say, you come up and fight me, I'll kill you, and we'll feed your body to the animals. But notice, David does not curse Goliath. He does not curse the Philistines. He says, God will deliver you. In order to prove that he is invoking God, not to curse the Philistines, but to praise God. God will deliver you because he is going to show you that he is God. It is not to curse you that we win. It is to prove that God is God. I like that. Verse 48. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley, and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Shaharaim, even unto Gath and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, Inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him, and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite. So first of all, the story generally goes that David slew Goliath with a sling, with a stone and sling. But that's not technically accurate. Goliath wasn't dead until David took the sword and chopped his head off. He may have been fully unconscious, or he may have just been stunned from the blow. The sling knocked him out, and then David killed him by chopping off his head. Once that was done, the Philistines started to run, the Israelite army charged in. We had another great battle, another great victory for Israel. There is a discrepancy here in the story, though, because in the previous chapter, chapter 16, we are told that Saul brought David into his court to act as court musician. And now he's asking who this person was, who his family is, and everything. And there's no way he would have had, well, I don't think, it's not that there's no way, I think that is unlikely, considering that when he was brought into court because he was called the son of Jesse the Bethlehemite. So how do we reconcile this, that he was in the court and yet Saul had no idea who he was? Now, there are some people who just say that the author of Samuel was compiling from different records, different stories, and didn't bother to straighten out the details. I think there's a better explanation, and that is that Saul didn't recognize David. Because David would only come and play when Saul was in these fits, under the influence of this evil spirit, as you recall from chapter 16. And in that state, he didn't know who David was. David would play his harp, the king would calm down, probably go to sleep, and then David would leave. So there's a very good chance, in my opinion, that Saul had never actually known David, had never actually seen David in a way that he could remember David. It says he loved David, but he loved him because of his playing. He loved the music. He loved his harp. And now he's not under this fit of the spirit. He's out at battle. I think being in battle kind of calms the spirit down a little bit too, because he is a man of war. And we get this whole thing, and he's like, wait, who is this? And David comes and says, oh, don't you know me? I'm the son of Jesse. So we can have we can see a possibility of how this works out. Now, it could also be that the source material for the book comes from different stories, and the author of Samuel wasn't that careful. I kind of doubt it, because it is the Bible, it is the scriptures, these are inspired. I don't think God would be that careless. But this is just some ideas that I have as I read it. So anyways, I will see you in the next one.